Welcome back to Mediocre Motors. You joined me back in July last year, not long after making a disappointing loss on last video's Subaru Impreza. You might see that in the background of my previous videos there was a rather sad looking Mazda 2 parked on the road, which hadn't moved in months. I'd asked a neighbour who knew the owner to pass on my number in case he wanted to sell it, and a few days later I got a message about it. I offered to buy the car for £460, which was double what We Buy Any Car would offer for it, as long as A, it would start, and B, it would move forwards and backwards under its own power. He turned down my offer, hoping for around double what I was offering, so I told him to let me know if he changed his mind. At this point, I assumed that buying this car was off the table, until annoyingly, the very same day I'd just bought my Civic Type R, he came back to me and offered me the car for the price I wanted. And I couldn't really say no, especially since I didn't have to tax or insure it to get it home, because it was already there. We arranged a time to meet, and I checked the oil level, hooked up my jump pack to the car, tried to start it, and it ran very roughly before cutting out almost straight away. After that, it would only turn over, but not start. Since I would be taking an even bigger risk buying this car now, I lowered my offer to £350, which he accepted. It felt like we both got a worse deal than we were hoping for, but oh well. So where do I even begin with this car? It had been sat for about 4 months, looking very sorry for itself. Since I couldn't use my 12-volt compressor if the car wouldn't start, I got out my trusty foot pump to inflate the tyres. Before I tried to do anything else, I needed to get the car to run and drive. A petrol engine needs 3 things to run: oxygen, fuel, and a spark. I couldn't be sure about it getting oxygen, but it would be very unlikely that it wasn't. And if there wasn't a spark, it wouldn't have been able to start for that 1 second the first time we turned the engine over. So I was going to go down the avenue of investigating the fuel supply to the engine. I started at the fuel pump, which sits in the fuel tank beneath the rear seats. I cleaned up the area so that no dirt would fall into the fuel tank. I wanted to see whether there was pressure in the fuel system, and my idea to do that was to disconnect the fuel line from the pump after turning the ignition on, to see if any petrol sprayed out. I don't think this was an especially clever idea, but it's what I did. And a bit of petrol dribbled out, but not enough for me to think we had any pressure. I thought that maybe the fuel filter, which is inside the fuel pump, might have been blocked by some sort of byproduct of the fuel going stale in it for a few months. It seemed like the best course of action was to just replace the whole fuel pump assembly with a known working one, so I got on eBay and ordered one from a breakers. Whilst I waited for it to arrive, I went to the auto parts store and bought a siphon pump and 2 jerry cans, which I filled up with super unleaded. I thought the additives in it might help to clean out the fuel system. I used the siphon to empty the fuel tank into a 3rd jerry can I had at home. I put the replacement fuel pump into the tank, then poured in the fresh super unleaded. That way I could eliminate stale fuel as a problem and avoid the risk of the old fuel clogging up my new fuel filter. Sitting back in the driver's seat, I turned the ignition on a few times to cycle the fuel pump and build up pressure in the system. But the result was the same as before, it just turned over and didn't start. I was thinking about it at work the next day, and it just didn't make sense to me. So when I got home, I thought I'd give it one more try. I turned the key to cycle the fuel pump another 10 times, and then I went to start it. And with a big cloud of smoke out the exhaust, the engine finally fired into life, and I felt so relieved. Before I could let the car run for more than a few seconds, I wanted to make sure that the oil level and the coolant level were okay. First the oil, and before I bought the car, the level was a little below the minimum mark. But now, it wasn't even on the dipstick. I think this was because, before starting the car, every last drop of oil had drained into the sump after the engine sat for months. But now that it had been circulating around the engine, a lot of it would still be coating the moving parts. So I topped it up with whichever oil I had lying around, because any oil is better than not enough oil. Now onto the coolant, and again this was very low. There was none in the expansion tank, and I couldn't see any in the radiator either. Squeezing the hoses, I could feel that there was some coolant in the system, but just not enough. I had to go out and buy some, but I topped it up to the right level. After that, I was ready to go for the first proper start. I let the car run for a while, checking that there were no leaks underneath, and making sure that the heater would blow hot air, which meant the coolant was circulating properly and there were no air locks. Everything seemed okay, except there was an engine management light on the dashboard. I plugged in my code reader to investigate it, and there was a fault code from the knock sensor, which would suggest the fuel was igniting too early or unevenly, which could cause serious engine damage. I thought this may have been a one-off fault code that was triggered on my first start when the engine ran really rough. So I hoped that just by clearing the fault code, it would turn the light off. So I cleared the codes and started the engine again. The light went out, but it came back on after a couple of starts, even though the engine ran fine with no signs of pre-ignition or detonation. A quick Google revealed that the knock sensor can quite often be faulty and cause this exact issue, so that would be something I'd have to replace. I went around the car to make a list of anything else I'd need to do on it. In the engine bay, I could see that the auxiliary belt was cracked and needed replacing, and I also spotted 3 things which I knew would cause the car to fail an MOT. And since its MOT certificate had expired, I would need to address these before I could sell it. First of all, the battery was insecure, because the clamp was missing. Secondly, the 2 tyres that sat flat had deteriorated or failed structurally to a point where it would be unsafe to drive on them. And thirdly, each wheel only had 3 out of 4 nuts, as the locking nuts, which I found on the floor, have been destroyed when they were removed from the car without the key. Cosmetically, the car needed a deep clean, and there was also some lacquer peel in places, and the headlights were very cloudy. I also wanted to give the car a fresh service, as it might not have had one for years, and of course it needed its MOT test. A long list, but on the plus side I found £1.89 in coins in the car. I got onto eBay and ordered all the parts I was going to need. The first parts to arrive were the oil and filter, so I got the car up onto my ramps and did an oil change.
All down my arm.
I also fitted the battery clamp I'd ordered. I asked Tom, my mechanic, to order 2 tyres, and I took the wheels that needed them off the car. I noticed the paint on the inside of the barrels was very flaky, which wouldn't be a good surface to stick wheel weights onto, so to try and make Tom's life easier, I scraped all the paint off and sanded back the surface before giving it a quick coat of paint. And the next day I took the wheels to get the tyres fitted. When I got home, I set about fitting them back on the car. I thought it would be best to have the new tyres on the front wheels, so I took all the wheels off, cleaned up the mating surfaces with a wire brush and put them back on, torquing them to spec, and at the same time fitting the new wheel nuts so that each wheel had a full set. At this point I was living my best life, totally unaware of how things were about to go downhill. When I got around to the driver's side rear, I could hear the jacking point crunch as I lifted the car up. The rear of the sills were just so rusty that the jacking point collapsed in on itself. Looking at it, I could see that it had already had a new section of sill welded in, which was definitely not a good sign. I grabbed a screwdriver to verify that I could indeed poke it right through what should be solid metal. Moving around the other side of the car, it looked to be equally rusty. The screwdriver went straight through there as well. To repair this, hundreds of pounds worth of welding would be needed, and I thought that if the corrosion underneath this car was so excessive that it had already been welded before and gone rusty again, there's a chance it could be a lot worse than it looked on the surface and end up costing even more money to repair. I weighed this up against the realistic market value of the car. The mileage was high, at just under 130,000, and cosmetically it wasn't in the best condition. At best, I'd get around £1,100 for it, but I could easily end up spending far more than that. As much as I really wanted to get this car back on the roads, I realised at this point that it just wasn't economically viable to save it. So I had three options here. Number one was to just sell the car as it was. This would be easy, but I'd make a loss of a few £100s. Option 2 was to continue fixing the car regardless and risk the costs running away with themselves. This would take time and effort, and I'd almost certainly make a loss too. The third option, and the one I decided to choose, was to sell parts off the car to recover as much of my money as possible, and then scrap what was left of it. So knowing all the money I'd spent on the car up to this stage was down the drain, I begrudgingly set about returning any unused parts I'd ordered and advertising online that I was breaking the car for spares. I knew it would be a long and frustrating process, but it seemed the most logical thing to do. So over the course of a couple of months, I had people come into my house to buy any larger parts they wanted, and all the smaller parts that I was posting out made me feel like I was keeping Royal Mail in business. My friend Joe, whose own Mazda 2 had been hit while it was parked up, came to visit, so it was only right to donate a front wing from my parts car. And his car certainly looks unique now, but he was happy with it. By the start of September, with my next project already here, I decided I needed the space, so I stripped as many easily sellable and small parts as I could and listed them for sale, before arranging for a scrap metal company to come and pick up the shell. And with that, it was the end of the road for the Mazda. So as always, let's go through the costs and see whether I managed to recoup all of my money. I probably ought to mention now that I got fined for not taxing the car or declaring that it was being kept off the road, which was mostly my fault, but it was also really annoying. So, the current spend on the car. So I bought the car for £350 and bought oil for £32.40 and an oil filter for £6.64. My 10 litres of super unleaded cost £15.47. The fuel pump cost £39.99. The wheel nuts cost £19.79. The coolant was £10.79. The battery clamp was £6.59. The aux belt was £17.72. Some aerosol paint I bought was £15.79. And a pair of number plates I bought were £10.17. I ordered a knock sensor and some intake manifold gaskets for £20.37, and then I thought I should probably buy a genuine knock sensor, so I bought that for £18.60. The tyres cost £70, and the fine for not declaring that the car was being kept off-road was £72, which brings us to a total spend of £706.32. So how much was I able to make back? So the total cash I found inside the car was £1.91, and then I was able to get a refund for the following items which I didn't use: a set of number plates, £10.17, a knock sensor, £18.60, intake manifold gaskets, £11.38, the aux belt, £15.06, another knock sensor, £8.99, and a can of spray paint, £12.44. And here's what I was able to sell off the car. The bonnet, £40, both wing mirrors, £74.64, rear passenger side door, £33.96, front passenger door, £42.61, The shell of the car, £50. The front plate mount, £12 7 pence. The rear view mirror, £15. The left tail light, £25 30. Side indicator, £5 25. Left headlight, £43. Front upper grille, £20 21. Radio head unit, £18 62. Tailgate, £42 60. Rear bumper, £32 99. Both driver's side doors, £63 60. Front bumper brackets, £8, and the right headlight for £33 65. I also sold the front bumper and the lower grille for £40 18 pence. This adds up to a total of £680 23 pence, meaning I have just £26 9 pence left to recoup. And it's important to mention that I still have a few parts for sale, but they're not worth much, so if I'm lucky I will break even, but I'm very unlikely to make any profit. This car was a gamble that didn't pay off, but I still felt somewhat accomplished that I was able to diagnose and fix the no start issue, because I'm hardly a mechanic. I've learnt from this that I need to be more thorough in checking over cars before I buy them, and to be willing to cut my losses earlier if needs be, because if I'd just broken the car for spares straight away, I would have made a few £100s profit. As always, thank you for watching, and look out for the next video where things actually go my way for once.